Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the literature review, a little bit about the process and how you go about engaging in writing a lit review. Also, we'll talk a little bit about descriptive research and descriptive statistics. So to start off with, we'll just kind of go through some review questions like we normally do in class. Obviously, we don't have the clickers, but hopefully you can kind of think about these questions as we go through them. So goals, we talked about these in the previous class. Goals are going to be broad, long-term aims. So that's number 2. Objectives. Okay, so objectives can be one of those 4 things, and the correct answer for this one is going to be number 1. These are the specific steps that you take towards reaching those goals. And a hypothesis, I think we all got this right the last time. Again, it's an educated guess, number 3. And then internal validity. So remember, validity is another name for accuracy. And so if we're doing something where we want to have a lot of internal validity, we're basically using good experimental design, good methods, good data collection. And so that would be number 2, in which our experimental design and everything allows for those accurate results. Number 4 is going to be an example of external validity, where you're trying to relate it to other situations. Okay, so start off with the thesis process. So you are doing research for the purpose of writing and defending a thesis at the end. And so the way I see it is a two-step process. The first step is really going back and looking through the literature, trying to find out all of the data that's been collected before, the research that's been done on the particular topic. And then that way you can move forward and really start to pursue a lot of the research questions and develop your research project and all those good things. So then step 2 obviously is taking all that information, designing your project, and then engaging in the implementation of that project with data collection, data analysis, and those are the key parts of that. So the purpose of a lit review, it can help you identify a specific research problem. So if you look through the literature, you're probably going to find that there are some questions still out there. There is some information that's missing. A lot of times at the end of a publication, what researchers will do is they'll identify future things that need to be worked on. And so you can get a lot of good information from that. In your case, probably your research problem will be developed through your advisor, because most likely they already have a project in mind. But typically, we use a literature review to be able to come up with things that we think would be interesting and novel to do research on. Of course, it gives you background information, so that gives you an idea of what's come before, different types of methods and data collection that are used. The benefits of a lit review, it increases your confidence. So it's really important to go back and go through the literature, because really what you're doing is you're learning. You're learning about either a particular crop or a particular animal, and you're getting to understand a lot more about it. So you're not necessarily going to be taking a class that relates specifically to your topic. And so this is a good way to get that background and essentially what's going to happen is as you start to understand and learn more about your topic, you're going to gain confidence so that you feel that you can speak with other people about your research. And also when you're presenting information, a lot of times at the end of presentation, people are going to ask questions. And so you can feel pretty confident that you're going to be able to answer any sort of questions that get asked, because you've got this foundation to work from. It provides, the lit review also provides new ideas and approaches. And this is important because It can help you to maybe even identify different methods that are so new that maybe your advisor doesn't know about. Maybe it's something where it's a process or it's a method that's a lot easier, a lot faster, maybe a lot more accurate. So there's a number of different things that you can find. Also, contact information is good for any paper that's published. There's always going to be a corresponding author, and so that person is going to have their contact information in the paper, email address, and a lot of times what you can do is, if there's something that you're unclear on, specifically in the methods, if you find a method that you want to use, but maybe they didn't explain it well enough or they didn't provide enough detail, you can always contact them. And I've done that before, to find out a little bit more about something that I couldn't see in the paper that was published. Again, I've already talked about this. You can basically use methods and designs of other people. So, especially an experimental design, if they've used those methods or if they've used those designs and it's been published in a reputable journal, then most likely, that's going to be something that you can use and you're going to be able to publish it as well. And you can, set up your project to essentially mimic what they did. Maybe they did something in another state and you want to, do it here, or you want to do the same thing but with a different plant or a different animal or something like that. It's perfectly fine to use the same kinds of methods and designs. Of course, you can cite them. That kind of helps to back you up that yes, what you're doing is kind of a method that's been used before. You can identify new sources of data when you do a lit review. So one of the best things to look for are those review papers. So it's not necessarily a research project that's been published with materials and methods and results and discussion, but what it is it's kind of a review of all of the research that's been done before. And so that's really nice because that'll give you a number of different sources to then identify and read about. And while we're talking about this, I just want to mention, as you're writing your lit review, if you find some information that you want to include in your lit review, that's great. But what you want to do is you want to go back to the original source. So a lot of times in a review paper or in the introduction section of a research paper, they're going to cite, other individuals, other research that's been done. And so, they might say that, so-and-so found that when they added fertilizer to switchgrass, it grew 10 feet tall. What you're going to want to do is you're not going to want to just, put that right in your lit review. You're going to want to actually find that original source, that source that they cited, and make sure that, yes, that is actually what happened. Not that, people are, going to lie or anything like that, but, mistakes are made. And sometimes one researcher's interpretation of somebody else's work might be different from your own interpretation. So it's always good to go and identify those original sources of data, and then you can use those in your lit review. The last thing is interpretation. So you've collected all your data, and so what are you going to do with it now? If you've done your data analysis, you've developed some graphs or tables, and you found some interesting trends, it's nice to be able to have some other information that's already been published that kind of corroborates what you found. And if it doesn't, that's okay too, but it's good to be able to cite others and say, well, this person found this, this other person found that. And so it makes it more of that's the whole discussion part of a results and discussion section, is really to be able to not just say this is what we found, but also to talk a little bit more about it, about why these trends occurred. A lot of times you'll be able to find, other people that have found something similar. Maybe it's not the same plant or animal, maybe it's not the same situation, but it's something similar that you can use to kind of corroborate, well, we think it's caused by this, and these other folks also found something similar, in their research project. So these are all good benefits of doing a lit review. And I think those are really things that are going to help you all throughout the process of writing your thesis and engaging in your research. So now we're going to talk a little bit about kind of some tips for writing the literature review. It's mostly organization, because you're going to be finding, hopefully you're going to be finding a lot of different papers related to your topic. So there's going to be a lot of information to kind of go through, and you want to really try to stay as organized as possible. So when you first start out, you want to try to identify keywords to search for. And so start out by writing the problem that you're trying to look for, writing that down. And so an example of this, something that I've worked on in my lab, is looking at different quality characteristics in switchgrass as it grows. So, things change within the plant: the nitrogen content, the ash content of the plant, the carbon content. These all change as the plant grows. And so that was something that we were interested in finding out more about, how these changes occur over the growth period. Okay, so then once you've identified the problem, then you want to identify sub-problems or subcategories within that main focus that you're looking at. So in my case, how does nitrogen change in the switchgrass that's grown? How does the ash content change? How does the carbon content change? So these are all individual sub-problems that relate to that main problem, which is those quality characteristics for switchgrass. And the quality is specific to bioenergy production. And then so finally, you can identify some keywords that you want to use. And so in my case, it would be things like switchgrass, growth, bioenergy, and then from the sub-problems, it would also be nitrogen, ash, carbon, phosphorus, whatever I'm specifically looking for. And then this, will be the kind of the keywords that you're looking out for, the words that you use in the searches that you do through the online databases, and that'll help you with being able to find hopefully as much material as possible. And then once you've found all of the papers that you can find, you're going to read them all and take notes from them. And so then that's going to build up your essentially your data for your lit review, all the data that's come before, all the research that's been done. Now, the real question here is, how do you know, you're going through the databases? How do you know when you're done? Do you look at every paper in the database that comes up? You could. It depends upon your topic. Some topics you're going to find a lot of information on, and you're going to find pages and pages and thousands of different articles. And, it would take you, 2 years just to go through all those papers. So usually the rule of thumb is essentially to, keep looking for papers until you start to see the same things come up again and again. So you might see the same authors mentioned in the papers. You might see the same basic viewpoints or familiar arguments, or, so you've kind of, you're not getting into anything really new. A lot of, everything builds from what came before it. So in a lot of papers, you're going to see people cite other papers from 5-10 years ago. And so you're going to start seeing those papers as you go through the databases. You're going to start seeing those papers come up. And so, after a while, you'll kind of realize, okay, I'm seeing, kind of the same things come up again and again. So, I think this probably is a good place to stop. For the assignment, you're going to have at least 10 papers, 10 research articles in your lit review. But, I advise a lot more, just because that's going to make it a lot easier to write. You're going to have a lot more to say, and it's going to definitely help you be prepared when you have to write your thesis and all that good stuff. Okay, so when you're looking at prior research, you want to try to read it with a critical mind to try to determine, if it makes sense, if the data that they come up with relates to the conclusions that they have. Now, you're not going to be able to necessarily know if methodologies are the right ones or the wrong ones, but there's a certain amount of common sense that can be applied to really be able to get some of that information. So, appropriate method, like I said, that's going to come with experience. Um, if they're looking at data, obviously replication is important. Are they using, a good number of replicates? If they're, using people, did they survey and get a good response rate? Did they survey enough people? Did they, include, did they do proper sampling to include, as many from the population as possible? Have they eliminated other possible explanations or conclusions? So that's really important. If you're reading through and you think, well, maybe it could have been caused by something else, by, something specific, and they haven't really dealt with that, then, that might make you question kind of the reputability of the journal, as well as the research that's been done. And this last one goes to external validity. So the results that they find, are they, just specific to that one situation, or, based on the way they set up the project, is it something that can be generalized to other situations? Can you use it in other areas? And so we're going to have some things that we do in class later on where we do some analytical review of different papers to really kind of go through it and get a feel for it. But, really common sense is going to be your guide when it comes to looking at some of the papers that you're finding and trying to be able to tell if they're good or not. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the note-taking process here. So you've got all the papers. So what you do is you read all the papers, and then you can, highlight them. You can underline the things that you want to do, whatever. There's essentially two methods that I'm going to talk about. The first method, you read the papers, you highlight or underline, and then you can write out the bibliography for each paper, and then copy down the notes like in a Word document, add your citations in bold, and then add any annotations. And so I'm going to give you an example of this. This is basically the process that I use. It's maybe more old school, because there's a lot of different types of note-taking software that can help you organize. But like I said, I'm going to show two methods. This is the old school, and then I'll show you the tech-savvy version. So what I've got here is an example of the note-taking that I was talking about. So what you can see up here is this is the bibliography for the one article that I'm looking at right now. And so what I did was I just basically wrote out the bibliography, and then I made it bold and underlined, so you could see it. It stands out from the rest of the paper, the page. Now, one thing to talk about while we're on this is a reference. So for your lit review, for your thesis, you're going to want to have a reference section. So for the references, you're going to need to have the authors, and you're going to want the date that it was published, the year that it was published. You're also going to want the title of the paper. You're going to want the journal title. So in this case, the journal title is Biomass and Bioenergy. Then you're going to want to have the volume number, so volume 33, and then the page numbers. So in this case, it's 610 to 619. So, there are a lot of different ways to format this. You can have the year in parentheses. You can, you can have a comma here instead of a colon. You know, I don't really care how it's set up. I just want to make sure, you know, for our assignments anyway, that you have this pertinent information. So the authors, the year of publication, the article title, the journal title, the volume number, and the page numbers. Okay, so basically what I've done is I've gone through and everything that I highlighted or I underlined, I basically just put it right in here. If it's been cited by somebody, if the information that I've taken has a citation, I include that citation, I make it bold just so it kind of pops out a little bit more. And then I just go through and I copy down all the notes. So that what happens when I'm done is basically I don't need to hang on to that big pile, big stack of papers. I've got all my notes in one place on this Word document. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I will annotate it. And so that's what these letters on the side are for. They basically they basically relate to specific themes that I've identified, things that I want to talk about. So, you know, in trying to remember what some of these letters stand for, D in this case for this one stands for drought. N in here stands for nitrogen. So this one talked about drought and nitrogen. G was general. So general topics, general information related to, in this case, it's switchgrass. And then H, this was historical information. I don't remember exactly what T related to, but essentially you can come up with your own annotation, and so these relate to categories. So what you can do then is when you're going through and you're starting to write your lit review, you can say, okay, I'm going to write about, you know, I'm going to start out with some general information related to switchgrass. So you go through and you find all of the ones that have been annotated with a G, makes it a lot easier to go through, and then you can just kind of write everything. So it's important, you know, when you're writing, you want to synthesize the information together. You don't want to just write everything from one paper and then move on to another paragraph and write everything that you found in another paper. You really want to synthesize it based on, you know, these categories that I'm talking about. And these categories, you know, you'll kind of be able to tell as you go through and you read the papers. You'll see things that, you know, kind of come up again and again, and then you can annotate it that way. And so that's one way of taking those notes, is to be able to really get it set up on a Word document and write that down. Now, another way to do it is with a software that's called Mendeley. And so Mendeley is a free program. You can download it, put it on your desktop, and you can download it from mendeley.com. And it's considered like iTunes for research papers. And I'll give you a demonstration of that in just a second. Like I said, it's a free program. You just kind of sign up, kind of like a Facebook account type thing, and then you're free to use it. So with Mendeley, essentially there's a number of different things that you can do. First off, you know, you can import any PDF files that you find. So your research articles that you find online, they're going to be PDF files. You can upload them and put them into Mendeley, which is great. You can save them to your desktop if you want to, and you can just click and drag them into this, and then they'll show up here. And so when they do that, you're going to see all this bibliographical information here. And what you can do to kind of organize it is you can create these tags. So you can tag with whatever keywords you want to. And I'm not sure if I've got any that already have some tags on here. Here are some author keywords that come up, and those can be useful as well. Here's a tag. This one's nitrogen. Okay, so if you remember before when I was doing annotation on the Word document, one of the categories I was looking at was nitrogen. So in this case, here's nitrogen. And then what you can do is you can search. If you wanted to filter, you could filter it by particular tags. And so you could look at only the papers that related to nitrogen, or whatever it was that you had identified. Also, you can mark these as read or unread, so that when you go through, you'll know which ones you've completed and which ones you haven't. The stars are a way to kind of create a favorite section. So you can, if you think there are certain ones that are more important than others, you can highlight that star, and then when you click over on this favorites tab over here, it'll only show those favorites. So that's another way that you can do that, to kind of organize things a little bit better. And then also, you can open up the paper in here, and you can do different things. You can highlight. So there's this highlight tool. You can, if this is something that you wanna hang on to, you wanna remember, you can highlight it. You can also put a note here. So you can say, this is awesome. And it'll put like this little sticky note here. So, something to kind of remember, maybe you saw similar information in another paper, you can make a note related to that, those kinds of things. So, you can do a lot of the same sort of things that you did, in that Word document. You can do that here as well. So there's a number of different things that are different options that are available here. One last thing, you can also upload the references. So it's got all the references in here, and what it'll do is it will allow you to upload those references onto a Word document, and it'll go ahead and set it up in whatever style you want to have, and it'll do it alphabetically. And so instead of sitting down and typing out all the references, it'll do it for you. And so that's one of the tools. I think you have to install a Word plugin, and then that'll allow it to do that from Mendeley and import it into that Word document, that it'll save it with the special style that you want to use. Okay, so those are essentially the two different ways that you can take notes, organize your information, so that it makes it a lot easier when it comes time to writing. Okay, so I like this little cartoon. The more information you find that relates to your topic, the better, because then you'll have a lot of information to talk about. You'll have a lot of information to relate to what you're doing. But of course, if you find something that's exactly the same thing as what you're doing, then that's a big downer. So hopefully, you will have some novel projects, some novel topics, and but there will be a lot of good information out there related to that topic, so you'll have a lot to talk about. Okay, so just a few things when you're writing your lit review. You want to keep organized. Like I said before, you want to kind of put things into categories and talk about those categories. Remember your audience. In our case, we're talking about to scientists, but on your committee, there's going to be people that aren't, they don't have a background specific in your topic. So you really want to try to give them a lot of good background information, rather than just kind of starting in the middle of things and getting real technical. And then synthesize. Again, this is, synthesize what you've learned. You're not just kind of writing things down from one paper and then moving to another paper and writing a synopsis of that paper. You're really synthesizing information together in logical categories, so that it flows well and all that good stuff. So this is an example of a way to kind of keep yourself on track as far as how to organize your lit review. Essentially, you want to start from information that's relatively general, and then move more specifically as you go along. So an example I have is from some research that I did for my PhD. It was related to using these waste materials from foundries as a soil amendment. So I started out very simply with the foundry industry, talking about the foundry industry, what it is, how does it work. Then I talked about this foundry sand. So this was a waste product that came out of the foundry industry, talked about it, the characteristics of the sand, how much of it there was, those kinds of things. And then talked about potential uses for foundry sand, whether it could be used in a soil, it could be used to make concrete or asphalt or something like that, some of the different ways that it can be used. And then comparing the sand to naturally occurring soil properties. Okay, so it's got sand in it, it's got clay, it's got some different types of materials that are present in soils already. So that's kind of building a case for we could potentially use it as a soil amendment. And then I kind of summarize a little bit and provide a justification. And so remember, we talked last time about the justification. That's essentially stating why it's important and why what you are doing in your research project is new and different from all the research that's been done before. And then lastly, you finish up with your objectives. And so in that case, you're talking about how you're going to add information to what's already out there and kind of fill those gaps in knowledge that you've identified from your literature review. And so what you can do is you can, any of these research articles that you're finding, you can look at the introduction. And the introduction is basically a miniature lit review. And so it'll be set up that same way, where it'll go from things that are general to other things that are more specific. And so as an example, basically, got one here. So this is from the paper that was published related to the research, and you can see that just like the example that I showed, the introduction was set up the same way. So the first paragraph essentially was talking about that foundry industry, some of the different aspects of it, what they did, and then we talked about in the next paragraph, talked about the foundry sands themselves and what they were made up of, what they looked like, all that information. And then we started talking about the potential for using it as a manufactured soil and how some of those properties are similar to the soils that already exist. And then again, we talked a little bit about how some of the negative effects are similar to some of the properties that exist in the soil. And then the last paragraph of the introduction, we essentially have a summary and a justification here. And then we also talk about the objectives that we're going to use. Okay, so this is a really good method to use when you're trying to organize what to say. Try to start from the most general information possible and lead more and more specifically into your topic, so that people can follow you through the whole thing. Okay, so I think that's basically it for the lit review. We'll talk about this a little bit more in class, and we'll have an example. I'll basically let you guys write a lit review, and you'll try to keep some of these things in mind so that you can set it up in a way that's going to work. Okay, so we'll review some questions real quick before we move on into research, descriptive research. So a literature review should end with the justification, abstract, objectives, or materials and methods. So a lit review really should end with objectives. Now, some advisors, maybe would want you to have, it set up a little bit differently. For the most part, this is a good rule of thumb, because this is what's done a lot of times with research papers as well. So number 3, objectives is the correct answer for that one. And then I think that's it. Okay, so Now we're going to talk a little bit about descriptive research, some different types of descriptive research that are out there, and we'll talk about things related to kind of the planning process again, how to set things up, the design of experiments. So to start off with, we've got some descriptive research designs. The first one is correlational, and so probably a lot of you have heard of correlations or correlation coefficients. And so a correlation coefficient is really that R squared value that you're going to see. If you create a trend line like in Excel, you can add an R squared value, which is your correlation coefficient, and that essentially relates to how well the data points relate to the trend line that's been drawn. And so an R squared value or a correlation coefficient is going to range from -1 to +1. And so an example of a negative correlation coefficient is going to be this top right graph that you see here. It's strongly negative, so as the X is increasing, the Y is decreasing. And in this case, you can see these points really line up on a line very well. So there's not going to be a whole lot of difference from the data and the trend line that's created. And so in this case, you're going to have maybe an R square value that's, you know, very close to -1. Let's see, this one's moderately negative. So this one might be, you know, 0.7, 0.7 maybe. This one's very weakly negative. So this one maybe is 0.5 or 0.3. And then we get all the way down to here where there's really no good trend line that can be formed. And in this case, the R squared value is 0. On the other hand, you could have something that is a positive correlation. So in this case, the X is increasing at the same time that the Y is increasing. So in this case, this is strongly positive. It's not as positive as this one, but it's still pretty good. This one might be a 0.8 for an R squared value. This one's not as good, so this one might be a 0.3 or 0.2. But that's essentially, you know, what we look at when we're looking at correlations. And so with correlations, you're going to be plotting two different variables on the graph. So on the x-axis, you might have something like growth. And then on the y-axis, or actually on the x-axis, you might have fertilizer. You know, the amount of fertilizer that was applied. On the y-axis, you might have the amount of growth or the amount of yield that you found. And so if those are strongly correlated or associated, then, you know, you can say something about that. There's some sort of a relationship between those two things. So we use that a lot of times in our research when we're comparing different things and looking for those kinds of relationships. Now, developmental designs are essentially, these are usually going to be more found in human type studies. With the developmental designs, you can have two different types. You can have what's called a cross-sectional design, and you can have a longitudinal design. With the cross-sectional design, you essentially take kind of a snapshot. If you're looking at you know, the effect of a certain drug on blood pressure or something. You might take, you know, a number of individuals and, you know, see how it affects them. And you're going to look at people from, you know, all different ethnicities, different gender groups, different age groups, different, you know, socioeconomic status to get a good representative sample, but you'll basically test and see if it works. You know, that's a cross section. With a longitudinal study, what you're going to do is you're going to take a group of people, but you're going to monitor them over time. So instead of looking, okay, does it cure it? Does it take care of it? You're going to look at it over the course of, you know, years to see, okay, does this have, you know, any net detriments? Does it have any, does the things that we saw in the cross-sectional study, do they continue on for years? So those are essentially the developmental designs. Observational designs, essentially you are observing different types of actions or behaviors in people. And so in this case, you're going to be observing or rating the number of times a certain behavior occurs, or you're going to be rating the intensity of a behavior. So, if you're looking at, obesity, let's say, you're looking at maybe the amount of, candy that a kid eats related to childhood obesity or whatever. You might look at, how much candy they eat at one time, or you might look at how often, they're eating candy. So these are kind of observational things. And particularly, in certain behaviors, it's important for you to train people to identify the behaviors. Now, if it's somebody that's eating candy, that's a pretty obvious thing to see. But if it's maybe a reaction to something, if a person is reacting to something, you have to understand, you have to teach them, okay, to identify that specific behavior. And then you also have to teach them how to rate that behavior as far as the intensity and things like that. So that everybody that's studying this behavior, is rating it the same way. Because obviously from one person to another, one person might say, well, that was really intense, and another person might say it's not. So it's important to train ahead of time so that everybody is looking at the same thing and making the same inferences from what they see. Okay, so the last thing is survey research, and this is one thing that Dr. Ricketts is going to talk about when he comes in a few weeks. But essentially, with survey research, you are looking at identifying a population that you want to get information from, and then there's a lot of things that go into designing a survey. Sampling and trying to get the correct proportions of individuals to participate. And then, of course, the data analysis as well. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that. Like I said, when Dr. Ricketts is here, and there's one slide in here where I'll give an example of a survey research questionnaire. Okay, so this little cartoon goes back to the correlation, the regressions that we're talking about. This person, if they love you more each and every day, then by linear regression, at some point, they hated you before you met. So that's just kind of a little joke. If you don't get it, just let me know. I'll explain it to you. So now we're going to talk about sampling. Specifically, we're going to look at different ways that we can sample things. And this isn't just for surveys, but it's also for if you're designing a project in the greenhouse or out in the field or even in the lab, being able to randomly select things is important. So with probability sampling, we're engaging in random selection. And random selection is essentially choosing a sample that you're going to use in a way that each member of the population has an equal chance of being chosen. And so then your random sample is hopefully going to have characteristics that are similar to the population as a whole. And so there's a couple of different ways of going about this. One way is with a random numbers table. So you'll see a lot of these tables in the back of a statistics textbook. You can find them online, but this is a small part of a random number table, and I've got it on here just to show how we use it. So let's say, as an example, let's say we've got these pots in a greenhouse. Okay, these are These are all ready to go. We've got plants, or we've got positions for these plants that we're going to put on this bench in the greenhouse. And we've got 20 different treatments. So we've got 20 different spots to put these plants. And so we've got treatments labeled 1 through 20. And so what you can do, if we go back to this random number table, so let's just take the first 2 digits from this group and we'll just go down here. So the first time we find a 1 through 20 in this, we'll stop. Okay, so this one right here, 0, 2. So this relates to treatment number 2. Okay, so that's the first one that we saw. And so treatment number 2 then is going to go, since it's the first one we found, treatment number 2 goes here. Okay, and then if we go back and we keep going, obviously we have to skip some of these because they're not in our number that we need. We are only looking 1 through 20 because that's all we have. So then the next number that we see here is number 20. And so number 20, treatment number 20, since that's the second one that we found, is going to go in this number 2 spot. And then we're going to fill this whole table, this whole space with all our treatments going through this method. And it does it very randomly so that you know that there's no bias, so that everything's treated equally and there's no issues. So that's how you do a random number table. We could have gone down, we could have gone across like this. It doesn't really matter where you start because it's all random. But you know, that's essentially the way to use it. Now there's another way to do this, and you can use this website called random.org, and it's essentially going to do the same thing. And I'm going to give an example of that here, hopefully. Okay, so this is random.org, and if you look down the page, you'll find a section called List Randomizer. So this is the List Randomizer. Okay, so like I said, we've got 20 treatments, so we'll just make a list of the 20 treatments. Okay, so they're all listed here, and then all we say is randomize, and then there they are. So if we go back to our pots in the greenhouse, you know, you can see that the first one that we found was treatment number 6, and so then that's going to go in that first pot there. And then the next one is treatment number 13, and that's going to go in pot number 2 here. And so you're just going to complete that the same way that you would from the random number table, except in this way, you know, it's a little bit easier, it's a little bit faster. It's generated online through their website. So those are some ways to do that, to really be able to have some good probability sampling. Now, there are a number of different ways of doing random sampling. The first one, simple random sampling, that's what I just demonstrated, where we take we're randomly using either the table or the website to generate this information. Another way to sample is systematic random sampling. So let's say you're doing a survey and you want to identify people to participate. You could take, let's say, the phone book and take every 10th person from the phone book. It's in alphabetical order, so presumably there's not really going to be any bias there. It's already pretty randomized. But you're going to systematically go through and take every 10th person and include them in your survey. And it could be every 10th, it could be every 5th, it doesn't really matter. But that's the example for systematic. With stratified, what you're going to do is you've already got a situation where, you've got a situation where you've already got individual groups that are separated. So if you wanted to look at the effect of a certain teaching tool on children in school, what you might do is you might just randomly select students from the school to participate. But something that might be better would be to break it out by grades. And so what you'll do is you'll take fourth graders and you'll randomly select a certain number of fourth graders. And then you'll go to the fifth grade and you'll randomly select, a number of the same number of fifth graders and so on. And so in this case, it's stratified by the different grades, so that you can maybe get a little bit more information that way rather than just kind of lumping everybody together and doing a simple random sample. And then the last one is called cluster random sampling. In this case, if we go back to the example that I gave of schools and looking at education, instead of randomly sampling within a school, what you might do is randomly sample the schools themselves. So, Nashville Metro has, let's say they have 20 schools. You might randomly choose 5 of those schools to work with. And then you can go on and, and sample the students from those schools, or you can get information, but you would look at it as a unit, a larger unit as the school, rather than maybe as a specific student individual. And so in this way, you're clustering things together and you're having these larger groups. So this is these are some examples, like I said, of different random sampling techniques. And this is all part of probability sampling, where everything has the same equal probability of being chosen to participate. On the flip side, we've got non-probability sampling. So in this case, there's no way to guarantee that the sample that you select is representative of the population. So the first one is convenience sampling. So this is a situation where you've got a survey, and another word for it is street corner sampling. So you stand out on a street corner, you hand out surveys, people fill them out, and you've got data. The problem with this is, of course, it's going to depend upon which street corner you're standing on. You could be, standing on Wall Street, or you could be standing on a street corner, in, by Central Park or somewhere else, and you're going to get a lot different sort of people that are going to be in that area that are taking those surveys. So in that case, obviously, you can see that you can't really guarantee that it's representative of the population. Another example is quota sampling. This is it's the same thing as convenience sampling, except you are trying to at least try to maintain a certain quota or a certain proportion of people that are in the population. So if your population is pretty much 50% male, 50% female, if you stand out on that street corner and you're handing out 100 surveys, you make sure you hand out only 50 to males and 50 to females. Also, you could do it by ethnicity, you could do it by socioeconomic status. Of course, you'd have to ask people these questions, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. And again, it's still non-probability sampling, but at least you're trying to get somewhat close to the population that exists. And then lastly is purposive sampling. So in this case, you're specifically targeting a particular group. So maybe we're looking at students. The effect of a certain teaching method on students at TSU. Of course, we're going to do our sampling here at TSU rather than doing it at Vanderbilt, rather than doing it, at a mall somewhere. So there's a specific purpose or a specific reason why we're doing it in that location. And so that's what purposive sampling is. Okay, now just kind of throwing this in there, when we're talking about research, there are 2 different kinds of research. Obviously, we've talked about quantitative and qualitative a little bit better. These are both probably related more to quantitative research. You can have basic or you can have applied research. So with basic research, you're trying to figure out how something works. A A lot of this is going to take place in the laboratory. You're trying to determine maybe, the physiology, how a certain enzyme works in the body, those kinds of things. And then applied research, you're essentially taking it out into the world and seeing, how it performs in the world. So maybe, researchers have found the way a particular enzyme in switchgrass works. And then, out in the field, we have, a number of different treatments. We're looking at different fertilizer rates. We're looking at different planting rates or planting dates or something. And then maybe we'll look and see how that affects that particular enzyme. So in that case, that's more of an applied approach where you're taking it to more real world situations. You're kind of taking it out of the laboratory and seeing how things perform in the real world. So these are more real world situations as opposed to lab-based situations. Okay, and then lastly, I mentioned that I was going to give an example of a type of survey research. So there are two different types that are mainly used. There's the pre-test, post-test, and then there's this post-then test. So pre-test, post-test, you essentially give a group a survey before you do anything. You give them a survey, kind of get their information, if you're, a lot of times we're focusing on knowledge. So you want to know, see how they feel, what they know about certain things. And then maybe you'll do an activity, you'll give a workshop or a presentation, and then you'll try to find out their level of knowledge after they've gone through this activity, with the hope that they've increased their knowledge. And then that will imply that whatever that activity that was done, that was a good activity because there was some knowledge gain there. Now with a post-then test, it's also called a retrospective post-test, what you're going to do is you're not going to give a pre-test. You're going to actually give both tests at the end. And the reason for this is because, especially if you're looking at knowledge, a lot of people aren't really going to know what they don't know. So somebody might, on the survey, the pre-test survey, they might say, oh yeah, I know a lot about switchgrass. I hear about it all the time. I know, I've got, if I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10, I give myself an 8 or a 9 because I know a lot about it. And then they go through the activity or the presentation and they realize, oh my goodness, there's a lot that I didn't know. So maybe now they say, well, I guess, I would rate myself a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10. So their knowledge has actually decreased because of the activity. And it's not really the problem with the activity, it's the problem with the pre-test where they tested themselves too high to begin with, and then, they had more of a realistic value at the end. So that's why a lot of times we like to give both tests at the end so that then they kind of have a better idea of where they stand as far as their knowledge is concerned. And so I've got an example. So in extension, we use this all the time. And so I've got an example that I've used before. So this was a presentation related to urban soils and biofuels. And so if you look under specific learning, this is kind of how we set it up. How much did you or do you know about these subjects? And in this case, the physical properties of urban soils. And so here, before this program, I knew very little, some, much, very much. Now I know very little, some, much, very much. So this is something that we would, like I said, we would pass out at the end of an activity, and then they'd be able to make a better rating of themselves before and then also now. So usually you get some better data that way. So that's just a caveat, and I think Dr. Ricketts will probably touch on that as well, but I wanted to at least give you a little bit of information about these surveys and how they work and some of the ways that they can be used. So I think we'll go ahead and we'll finish up with some review questions. So you can kind of test yourselves. First off, a research design that rates or counts behaviors is it correlational, developmental, observational, or consequential? And the correct answer is number 3, observational. That's the one where we're looking at different behaviors. Sampling to get the correct proportions as the population is called probability sampling, purposive sampling, quota sampling, or stratified sampling. Now, this is a trick question because it could be either 1 or 4. 1 is probability sampling, so in that case, yes, you're always going to be, getting the correct proportions. Stratified sampling is an example of probability sampling, so that's also why it's an okay. Purposive sampling, yes, you're trying to get proportions, but you're still not going to be getting all the proportions. I mean, unless you really go out and you try to figure out the proportions of everything based on ethnicity, based on gender, based on socioeconomic status, and then you try to keep track of all that when you're standing out on the street corner passing out surveys, you're probably not going to get the correct proportions. But with probability sampling, you definitely will. Research to identify how things work. So in this case, we're talking about how things work, let's say in the laboratory. So in that case, the correct answer would be 1, basic research. Applied research, you're seeing how things work in the real world. And then what should a literature review do? Okay, so in this case, the correct answer is number 2. You want to synthesize things. That's the key word there, synthesize previous research. You don't want to just, like number 1, you don't want to list what has been done before. You really want to synthesize it together. And so then you can have something that makes sense, that's logical, that people can follow. And then lastly, this is from before, a literature review should end with number 3, objectives. And lastly, what type of random sampling involves choosing every nth person? So this could be every 5th person, every 10th person from the population. Okay, so in that case, we're looking at the systematic sampling. So that's number 3. Okay, so that basically finishes things up. And if you have any questions, we can definitely take care of those questions in class. And so, like I said before, we'll meet on Monday in room 114 in the barn, which has the computer lab, and we'll go through that learning assignment, that literature review kind of writing assignment to kind of get you guys ready with how to set it up based on some of the things that we talked about in this lecture. So we'll see you on Monday. If any of you have any questions before then, definitely let me know. You can send me a message through Slack, and I'll be sure to get back to you. All right, thanks. We'll see you on Monday.